Good evening, everyone. It's good to be back here. I used to regularly attend these lectures back. I used to live just north of here, and I would try to come out here as often as possible to attend these lectures, and so there's a lot of familiar faces around, and it feels good to be home. This last week was the unfortunate anniversary of 4 years that the conflict has been going on in Syria. And unfortunately for me, it's also the anniversary of me making one of the probably stupidest miscalculations of my life. I was applying for the Padnos International Travel Abroad Scholarship at Grand Valley University, and they sent me an email saying we're going to be doing interviews at the end of this week for the finalists to come in and to talk about the projects that you proposed, the study abroad projects. And at that point, I was registered to attend the University of Aleppo in Syria. And so I came in to the scholarship committee, and Mark Schaub was there and some others, and they said, "So, Jared, explain to us, tell us why it is that you think Syria is still a safe place to study. Why is it that you still feel comfortable that this is going to be an all right place for you to travel as a student?" And I gave them what ended up being entirely false predictions of why Syria was never going to descend into a civil war. I went home that afternoon, started reading the news, and there was reports just coming in from a day or two earlier. There had started to be massacres of peaceful protesters in the streets of Syria. Clearly, my study did not go through with continuing the study program there at University of Aleppo, and instead I ended up getting my program shifted over to the city of Irbid in north of Jordan. And I just wanted to, just to start us out here, I wanted to show just a couple of maps, just kind of give a little bit of references to the areas I'm talking about. This, of course, is Jordan, the country where I have the most experience and knowledge. And this area up here is all Syria. Syria is much more populous than most of its neighbors. Jordan, their native population is currently about 6 to 7 million, something like this, of actual citizens. Whereas now in the region, there are approximately 5 million Syrian refugees who have now actually moved out of Syria. But there is many more than that. There are still people that are fleeing from war, but that are trapped inside the country of Syria. We have probably something in the order of 7+ million that are still trapped inside of Syria trying to get out. So these refugees have been flowing out from Syria into Jordan here on the south side. They've been going up into Iraq in this direction. They've been going down into Lebanon over from this direction and going up into Turkey as well. So each of these countries has absorbed huge numbers of new population. And Jordan has taken from this little area right here, this is the Dara province of Syria. And the Dara province of Syria is really one of the most revolutionary hot areas of Syria. This is an area of Syria that has had difficulty with the current government regime for quite a long time. And so when uprising broke out first in this area, this is where the first public real problems started to take place, was right in this area. And I just wanted to show also this is the latest statistical report from the UN Refugee Agency. And it's not showing up too clearly up here on the screen, but up here they have the province of origin for all the different registered refugees that are in the country of Jordan. And Dara province is where 45% of the refugees in Jordan come from. So nearly half of all of the refugees that have come into Jordan have come from that one small gray area that I pointed out to you there, this area right here. And most of those refugees have come down. This is the long border that Jordan shares with Syria. It runs all the way through here. And at the beginning of the conflict, when people were first crossing over, when I first started to take images from the conflict, people were crossing at these 2 points right here are the legal border crossing points where people would cross with their passport. Just things were starting to look bad, and people would say, "Okay, I want to get out of here." They'd go, and they would get a stamp out, and they would leave. And they would cross over in this area. And then even when it started to get a little bit worse, still people would cross through. This is where most of the population is. This area is largely desert and quite empty. The people would still cross over from these areas. As the security situation deteriorated and got worse and worse and worse, the Jordanian government started closing off these areas of border, where this area became more and more difficult to cross, until finally they only allowed people to cross at a few points over in these extreme desert regions. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but some of it is political because Jordan really needed to try to limit the number of people coming in. So if they could limit to only allow, they could officially have an open border policy, but it was incredibly inaccessible and difficult for people to get to these points. They had to take harrowing journeys across immense distances to try to arrive. So for me personally, I went to Jordan. I studied Arabic language at the university in Irbid, Yarmouk University, and then I decided to stay on. I graduated while still abroad, and I'm going to try to kind of tell you a little bit about my journey in kind of correlation to the refugees' journeys as I kind of got some experiences along the way. So one of the first projects that I was trying to get into photojournalism, my background before coming to Grand Valley had been in cinema arts and photography, and so I studied here, and then I was trying to get back into the journalism and the photography world. And I made a connection with a journalist who was writing for the International New York Times, and we did a story about an MSF clinic in Amman that it takes in people that have been war wounded from Iraq, from Yemen, from a few came after the revolution in Egypt. And right when we went in, they were still largely, they were filled with Iraqis. And the image that ran in the story that I did was, it was of an Iraqi refugee. But while I was there, this was the first time that I was really starting to come in contact with the results of what was starting to happen just north of where I was living in Syria. I met this little girl who was 4 years old, and she and her sister had both been burned terribly when a rocket had hit their house. It had collapsed, and they and their parents were both badly disfigured. The only member of the family that was saved was the infant who was still in its mother's womb. And so it was born a few months later to a disfigured family. And this became really kind of real to me. It had been something I knew was happening. I knew it was close by, but it wasn't something that I was seeing on a daily basis until all of a sudden there it was right in front of me. So this is 2012 that we're talking about, and this was another story that I worked on. They ran this image in their online version of the story. And the headline of the story was, "Jordan struggles to absorb refugees from Syria." So we're now talking about 3 years ago, and the headline was already, "Jordan struggles to absorb refugees from Syria." And, the content of what the story is saying, the burdens are huge and growing. The latest estimates by the United Nations put the number of Syrian refugees at more than 300,000 in Jordan. Now there are over 600,000 registered, and estimates put it closer to 800,000 that are in the country. So it was already struggling at that point. Now, a few months later, I ran another story, "Urban refugees strain resources," and the story continues. And so up to this point, I had just been doing sort of ad hoc newspaper work wherever I could find any kind of work. The first time that I actually worked for the UN Refugee Agency, I was hired on very short-term basis for a project. Their High Commissioner was coming into Jordan, and he was visiting these contested border areas, that area that I showed you where the official crossings were. But at this point, there had been hundreds and even thousands of people were crossing many days, and the situation was quite dangerous, though, because the Syrian military would shell people as they were leaving, and then the Jordanians would be using night vision, kind of tracking, and it was quite a tense situation up on the border. And so they hired me to come up and photograph the visit of the High Commissioner to the area. And so this was the first opportunity that I had to actually interact with and meet people that were just arriving, literally minutes or hours before becoming refugees, and that they had crossed an international border. Even though they often, as they're walking, they don't know when the moment is that they've crossed, because it's not like there's a big sign that says, "Welcome to Jordan" or something. They're often crossing through kind of remote areas. And like this young man right here, he was 2 or 3 years old, and his mother said that his father had been killed by the regime. This was early 2013. And so there he is with his bags, and everyone is coming in with their their bags. And so we arrive here at this area along the border,